Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning again to everybody who I've already spoken to. Hello to everybody else who's tuned in to learn more about the elephants of China. Now, our guest, I have to say, I first heard of Professor Ahimsa when I think a paper you did on Myanmar elephants and seed dispersal, where you proposed that that having elephants in a forest should be something that gives greater carbon credit, and something that I think is an incredibly sensible idea. I'm not sure, I don't think it's been acted upon yet, unfortunately, but that was a long time ago. And then the next interaction, I think, is when we sent a couple of students down to you they were studying with Dr. Josh from Mahidol University. And literally the first line of the report that they sent back, they were female students, the first line of the report, I don't know if I've told you this, the first line of the report that they sent back to me, as I required from the foundation, was, Dr. Ahimsa is incredibly handsome. And from that moment on, I decided not to talk to you again, because no one's ever said that to me again, and never to employ anyone from Muka either, obviously not seriously. And then we met at Kota Kinabalu, and you were moving up to China to work at the Chinese Academy of Sciences, at Xishuangbanna Tropical Botanical Gardens, anyway, right next door to the Anantara in Xishuangbanna. And that was 2019, November 2019, a week or two before the world turned totally upside down, and all the plans we made for collaboration haven't happened. But then I don't think we spoke for a couple of years, and then we had an elephant herd go wandering through up towards Kunming. Oh no, we spoke about the one in Xishuangbanna first, and then another one going up to Kunming. So there are elephants wandering all over Southwest China at the moment, or so it seems, or China's a big place, which have made the press, made the world news. So I'm incredibly glad that you have time, especially after the evening you've just told me you've had with poor old Spain and the football. You have time to come and talk to us and tell us a little bit about Chinese elephants, or the elephants in China, give us a bit of history for wild elephants in China. And then we will go to a question and answer session. And I'm delighted to say we have a Zoom full of people as well. So Ahimsa, enough of me, over to you. Please tell us all about what's going on up there, about 250 kilometers in that direction.
Thank you very much, John. So let me just share my slides. Yep. Okay, can you guys see my slides?
Yes, we can. Thank you very much.
Okay, fantastic. So then I will do a very, very brief presentation just to set the context, and then we'll have the discussion later. So I'm going to talk about the return of the elephants, about the situation of Asian elephant conservation in China. Just let me start by saying where I work. I work at the Xishuangbanna Tropical Botanical Garden, which is part of the Chinese Academy of Sciences. And can you see my pointer? So then we are located here, very, very close to Laos, very close to Myanmar, close to Thailand, and close to Vietnam. So it is China, but it's very much within the Southeast Asian context. It's a lovely place. It's a wonderful place to live, and a fantastic place to work as well. And as John was saying, I moved here in March 2020. Something that I don't recommend people is to move between countries in the middle of a pandemic. It's not a practical idea. And then a bit about me and my background. So then I'm a professor, and I'm the principal investigator of the Megafauna Ecology and Conservation Group. We are a very small group. We just started about 1 year ago. And before being here, I spent almost 10 years in Malaysia, working at the University of Nottingham, where I was leading the management and ecology of Malaysian elephants. And before that, I was based in Japan and doing my research in Sri Lanka. So I have a bit of background in South Asia, in the Sundaland in Southeast Asia, and now here in China. My research work is very focused on elephants and big animals, but I try to do it in a very broad perspective. So then I like this analogy with the elephant and the 8 blind men, 8 in China, 7 in India, depends where you hear the story. And I think that elephants are probably the most studied wildlife animals, particularly African savanna elephants. There are hundreds of PhD dissertations and thousands of papers about the ecology, the biology. And it's fascinating to see how little we understand about their ecology and how to conserve them. So part of my work is try to approach elephant ecology and conservation from this perspective, trying to use different angles, being very interdisciplinary, and trying to look at things from a ecological point of view, social point of view, and from very theoretical and very practical point of view. There are two main areas of work which I'm most interested. One is on the ecological function of elephants in ecosystems, particularly on seed dispersal, as John was saying. We need to understand that a forest with and without elephants is very different. Elephants are their presence is very, very conspicuous. They do many things and they have a strong impact on ecosystems and their function. So as we lose elephants from any forest, this also affects the ecosystem function. And the second one is bringing a science-based human-elephant coexistence or mitigation of human-elephant conflicts. Whenever we have elephants and people together, there's some amount of conflict, and I think we cannot avoid that. It's impossible to coexist without any conflict, but I think we need to learn how to reduce the amount of conflict to tolerable levels, and I think science is really key to move in that direction. So about Chinese elephants, and again, I'm relatively new about the context in China. Most of my work has been in South and Southeast Asia before. But let me tell you that the elephants used to be present over much of China. Around 7,000 years ago, they were north to Beijing in a very, very high latitude. And gradually they were reducing, or they were shrinking the range. They were going south, and elephants were disappearing throughout much of China. If you're interested in this, Mark Elvin has a beautiful book called The Retreat of the Elephant, published in 2004, that explains in very fine detail how people and elephants were conflicting. And he talks a lot about the war on elephants, how there was a very serious competition between human societies and elephants for the domination of the landscapes and resources. But jumping very fast to 2021, what we have is a different situation. This map is taken from Liu et al. 2017. And what it shows that the elephant population had been shrinking until the mid-1990s, when elephants were restricted to very small areas in Xishuangbanna. This place is called Mongyang. And then we have a few small other elephant populations. But from the mid-1990s onwards, what happens that many elephants, or some elephants, began to move out from Mongyang and from some other areas and occupied new territories. So they are recolonizing areas. This is what I call the return of the elephants. So now we are in China in a situation in which we have a very small Asian elephant population, probably around 300 individuals, which is less than 1% of the global total. But this population is growing and it's expanding. So in that sense, it's quite unique within the Asian elephant context, because in most of the populations, the number of elephants are being reduced. So what we have now in China is a situation of managing this growth. As a conservationist, I think we wanted to have the population growing, so then that's a success. But now we need to be aware that with this success come secondary consequences or side effects that we need to manage, and that's mainly conflict. Of course, a few months ago, the Chinese elephants broke the internet, and I guess most of you have seen these things about the group of elephants that moved all the way from Mongyang to Kunming. It was very fascinating to watch this live, to see how elephants were going very, very far from the traditional range, and they were venturing into these high human density areas and really going into the unknown, and how they ended up in a city of 8.5 million people. We were making jokes about this months before it happened, as something that could not happen. Maybe the elephants are going to Kunming. Actually, they were going to Kunming. And as you know, the world was watching this. This became big news in the last couple of months, and it really was present in news outlets all over the world. It was a very popular story, and I think was perceived as a very positive story, both within China and outside of China. And maybe something less known is that at the same time as these elephants were going to Kunming, there was another herd of elephants that was staying inside the botanical garden where I am right now. They came on the 24th of May, and they spent here a bit more than 1 month. And it was 2021 is the first time that we had wild elephants in the botanical garden. It had never happened before. And in this area where I am, in the broader area, there had been no elephants in over 40 years. It was very interesting to experience firsthand how it is dealing with elephants. We had serious crisis situations. So you can see this photo. Everyone is very serious here. The elephants were very close to coming into the core part of the garden, and our garden is a peninsula. So if the elephants had come in, it would have been a disaster in terms of human safety and in terms of the safety of the plant collection. And if we can talk more about this later, about how it feels, the feeling of threat that it's caused by elephant presence in a place like this. And this is an image of some of the current elephant landscapes in China. So as you can see, this is extremely human-dominated landscape with paddy fields, sugarcane, tea plantations, some rubber, and elephants are right now in this point. So many elephants in China right now, they have completely habituated to live in this kind of human-dominated landscape, spending their days in the shade in some of these tree areas and spend the night feeding outside on crops. And there are some extreme cases, like this is in Monghai, quite well-known group of elephants who have caused quite some amount of trouble to people living there. And you can see that they have lost fear. They very comfortably come into human settlements, houses, villages, and they're very curious. You can see how they're playing around, and basically they are doing whatever they want. They're in control. But what is the future of Chinese elephant landscape? So there's this paper by Shermin de Silva and co-authors that models the potential future landscapes of Asian elephants all over the range. And what we find is that Yunnan appears as an outlier in that they predict that maybe Yunnan might gain quite some amount of habitat stability during the 21st century. While every other country will be losing elephant habitat, China might be gaining elephant habitat. So this presents many opportunities, big challenges, and we're dealing with a complex system, hard to manage. So then I will be very happy to discuss more details about this. So then I will just stop the slide soon, and then maybe we can go back into seeing our faces.
John, please unmute your microphone.
As I was saying, we have a room full of elephant experts, and thankfully we also have have some computer experts as well. So I'm not going to ask too many questions, but my first question comes from that last slide from Sherman, which I haven't seen yet. So when she predicts that you will gain, or China will gain elephant habitat, is she predicting that there will be a reversal of all those rubber plantations? I mean, I first went up to Xishuangbanna, must be nearly 20 years ago, and that was before rubber had taken over, it seems, and there were no highways or tunnels or anything along those lines. And then I went up again 10 years later, and suddenly there's rubber everywhere. So how is China going to get its habitat back? And then after that, we'll turn over to the other the experts on the Zoom.
Yeah. So then the study what does is modeling land use changes over a long period of time. 80 years from 2020 to the end of the century, and the result is at the end of the at the end of the century. So this is in 80 years from now, and is based on some pre-existing land use models that predict different. There are 6 different climate change scenarios, also including some socioeconomic changes. So then the pre-existing land use models are quite established, and it's something that they're used for this kind of modeling. But the tricky thing here is that this increase of elephant habitat suitability is not only Xishuangbanna, it's all over Yunnan. So we're talking about a much broader scale. So right now, elephants occupy a very small portion of Yunnan. They are only here in the southwest and a little bit in Linchan. So and the point here is what this study says, that elephants will have habitat if they go outside, in they expand their range considerably. And about rubber, yeah, I think there are opportunities to kind of recover some of the land that was converted to rubber in the last 30, 40 years. But this is much broader. It's all over Yunnan.
Okay, so in a way, this wandering herd that have headed to Kunming are preempting, or they've read the preprint and they say, well, there's habitat up there, let's go for it.
Yeah, I mean, the scale of these movements, we knew that the elephants were going to be expanding. That was what we were expecting, and I can tell you that 6 months ago we're kind of playing with the idea of how much, how far. That's one of the key things that we are trying to work on. And then these elephants, back in December, they went to a place called Mojiang, which is about 100 kilometers away from their previous range. And it was pretty extraordinary at the time. It was very exciting to see them so far. And we're wondering, what are they doing? But the fact that suddenly they just headed north and they went all the way to Kunming, it shows us that the scale is very, for elephants, is not such a big deal. There was one day that they moved 23 kilometers. So then they can physically move a lot. The point is whether they can find habitat to establish, and whether how much the population can establish beyond the current range.
Okay, great. So people from the Zoom, our gathered experts, could you unmute yourselves and ask questions? Or if not, if everybody's oh, Megs, you've unmuted yourself. Do you have a question?
Yeah. Hi, John. Hi, Ahimsa. Thanks for that. That's really, really interesting. What kind of research have you guys got planned or that's already being conducted within the national park to try and understand why the herd has sort of left its range? And do you think that's just associated with the carrying capacity being exceeded?
Sure. I don't plan to do much work in the reserve right now. So most of my interest right now is going to be focusing on the outside of the reserve. And I think that, yes, it's a matter of for some reason, the amount of resources were perceived as not enough by the elephants. So the elephants perceived that the habitat was no longer good enough, and they chose to move out. And there could be multiple reasons. One is that there is less food for some changes inside the reserve, or maybe there are more elephants for the same amount of food. So what I can tell you is that in the reserve, there hasn't been much human disturbance in the past 20 years. It's right the opposite. We lost human disturbance. There used to be more people. There are people living in the reserve. There used to be many more people living inside. So what we have is now the forest is growing and the canopy is becoming denser, and there's more canopy cover than there used to be before. So that's a reason why elephants might be having less food. Second, we know that the elephant population has been growing over the last 25 years, and we know that there were multiple small dispersal movements before from Mongyang. So then elephants in nearby populations in a place called Simao or in a place called Monghai are elephants that came from Mongyang before. So in this kind of moving out from Mongyang has been happening for 25 years. What was exceptional this time is, I would say, two things. One is that there were 2 elephant herds moving at the same time, and that's surprising. And the other thing is the scale of the movement for the Kunming herd. That's so. And I think these are 2 different questions: why these 2 elephants left the park at the same time, and why that group of elephants chose to move so far away.
Great, thank you. I know in other areas of Southeast Asia, in Cambodia, where I've had sort of experience over the last couple of years, despite areas being classified as national parks, there's still a lot of large-scale land clearing going on and rubber plantations being put in there. Do you find that in the national park in Xishuangbanna, are there plantations getting put within the area?
No, there are crops, and again, there are villages inside. So then there's human activity. It would be a bit similar to protected areas in Europe, you know, where you establish a protected area in place that there are already people living and there are things happening. But the tendency has been the other way around. So then, since the protected area was established, what has happened is that people have been moving out of the park, and some areas that used to be cultivated have been abandoned, and they are now being kind of restored for forest, and so there hasn't been any clearing or any disturbance, any unusual disturbance. Right, the opposite. There has been is less disturbance than it used to be.
Interesting, thank you.
So one of the strong discussion points in China right now is, should we bring back disturbance into the protected area? Because by law, by management, you cannot open forests, you cannot disturb the forest. But people realize that as a consequence, the protected areas that were established mainly for elephants are having less food for elephants. So some people are saying we should be able to open gaps and to create some small scale disturbance that increase the amount of food for elephants and can increase the carrying capacity inside the park. But as of now, it is not legal for the National Nature Reserve to come in and disturb the habitat.
Okay, and I think for those on the line who are not wild elephant and human elephant coexistent experts, the reason I could ask you the reason for that, but presumably the reason is that elephants are not specialist deep forest species. They're an edge species. They like grasslands. They like, if there's human habitation, they thrive in 2 or 3 year growth from slash and burn and those sorts of areas. So actually, I should ask the experts really, but elephants are not a forest species. They would prefer it if we were protecting grassland for them. The problem in Asia is, of course, that there's most anything that can be grassland is now rice.
Well, elephants are extremely flexible ecologically. Okay, they are what we call super generalist, and they can live in many conditions. They can live in very hot and dry areas, into cooler areas, in very wet areas, in open environments, in tropical rainforest in Malaysia. So they can make do in many environments. But given the choice, the preferred habitat will be the forest edge. So they will be living right outside the forest. What we see when we observe fine scale movements of elephants, that during daytime they will always look for some shade. Okay, so they need some kind of canopy, they need forest. But at night, they like to go out and then feed on open areas, particularly in highly disturbed environments, in areas with a lot of early succession vegetation. So then in old growth forest, elephants can survive, but they will have a tendency to move outside the forest, to be in the border. And what we see is that inside big old growth forest, we have very low elephant density. We see some males going around, some female groups sometimes, but that is not where they spend most of the time. Most of the time will be in the border. And that's why whenever we have elephants and people, we have conflict, because we create environments that elephants like. So we can create a protected area and expect that elephants will live happily in the protected area, but elephants tend to think otherwise, and they come to the border of the protected area, often right outside, and that's where the interaction with people happens.
Great, thank you. And that brings us on to our typed question from Emilio, who thanks you for the opportunity to join the session. And he asks, could you please tell us about how local community members are involved in the process of trying to identify ways of minimizing conflicts with the elephants? Yeah,
well, I haven't been much involved with local communities, but what I know, for example, when the elephants came to Monglun, to the area where we are right now, there were many meetings. So then the way China is organized is by is very structural, and then There are many committees and groups, and I know when the elephants came here, there were many meetings with the local communities to discuss the situation, to think about what should be done. One of the key things here has been trying to take care of safety of people. The main concern for human-elephant conflict in China is about people's safety, and we can discuss that a bit later if you want. So then the key thing was trying to discuss what were the risk situations, in what situations could be more dangerous for people and how they could be involved. And then they have been involved in the monitoring. So then the villages have leaders, or the small communities have leaders, and they have been involved in monitoring the elephant presence, in organizing people to check where elephants are, and then conveying the information to the other people. But I'm not sure about the more formal discussion in terms of long-term plans and long-term strategies. Hi, Emilio, by the way. Long time.
Hi, Emilio. Bichette, I see you have a comment. It's about the opening of gaps in forest. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask?
Yes, thank you. And how are you, Ashima? I'm Bichette Nunto from Thailand. I see your idea about open the gap in the forest is very interesting. In Thailand, we try to create artificial pond and artificial solids, but it's very hard to create a gap in the forest because, as you mentioned, that we have the law to protect the forest. But it is interesting to try to experiment in the natural forest, because we have one side in Guiburi National Park, WWF and other scientists experiment there, but the result from some scientific report I have not been seen. But now the phenomenon at that place, elephant use that place a lot more than the gap created. So I think if the community of Asian elephant have the example for the rest of our community, I think it's useful for Thailand to present this idea to the government to try to make some area as an experimental site for this idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, I know the case of Kuipuri. I have been there a few times, and I like a lot what has happened there. I think there are many interesting lessons to learn from Kuipuri. Regarding the gaps in the protected areas in China, I'm not being very kind of prescriptive about what should be done, because I think all depends on the conservation goals. So then if the goal is to conserve biodiversity in general, I think there is nothing better than mature forest, with some mosaic and some diversity of habitats. But I think we need to promote large extensions of a continuous old growth forest. If the conservation goal is to have more elephants in the park, then yes, we need to create gaps, and that will increase the current capacity. So then I think at this point the discussion is on what should be the conservation goal, and what are we trying to achieve with these protected areas. And also China is currently trying to create a new national park, because what we have now is called nature reserves, but there will be a new protected area, a new figure called a national park. And I think at this moment it's at that level of discussion on what are we trying to achieve and how we will move in that direction. So then I think before getting into action of making forest gaps and things like that, we need to define what we're trying to do. And I like a lot the way that Koiburi did the habitat restoration. So for people who might not be familiar, Koiburi was once an area with a lot of pineapple plantations and eucalyptus, but the area was declared a national park. And some of these pineapple areas were restored into grasslands and ponds, and there are some artificial salt licks. So we're now thinking about taking some of that model within our botanical garden in the area that elephants spend several weeks this year, and try to see if we can create a habitat that is suitable for elephants if they want to use as a corridor when they come back in the future.
Yes, and that was the question. A question I was going to ask is because Pu'Er, they did crucially through the Royal Project as well as the national parks, not only preserved forests, they took over the pineapple land, some of the flatlands, so there was a mosaic. Is that a problem that or is that something that has happened? It tends to happen a lot in Thailand, I know, and the rest of Southeast Asia, where people see, okay, forest is what we should preserve, and they don't preserve the flatlands, which a lot because of rice cultivation. Is that a problem that occurs all the way up into Xishuangbanna as well, does it?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the most fertile areas are very, very crucial for people, and particularly in Xishuangbanna. So Xishuangbanna is very diverse culturally in terms of the human communities, and the lowland areas are where the Dai people, most people live in lowland areas, and there are some other communities that live in the highlands or in the hills. So the lowlands are highly, highly populated compared with the hills, and it's a very hilly landscape. So then, yeah, I think there's most of the lowlands will be occupied by villages and paddy fields and other kind of crops.
Okay, shall we? Oh no, we've got one more from the Zoom. Wai Han is asking, when was the last time there was disturbance within the reserve? So going back a little bit, I think I should have asked the question earlier.
Well, there is disturbance nowadays. So then there are some villages within the reserve, but the tendency, like everywhere else, is people are moving away from small remote villages into more bigger towns or cities. So, and I think the policy it is right now, and I think should be encouraged further, is trying to create incentives for people to move to other places. I was in a village late last year that people had to go by boat and they had to hike a lot to reach to the place. And then they were offered land right outside of the reserve, so they move out, and they were very happy with that because they were just living by the road, and the life was much easier. And then now those crops are highly used by elephants, and there is a restoration project in the lands that these people used to cultivate. So what I foresee is that in the next 10, 20 years, a tendency towards urbanization, people moving into bigger clusters of human settlements, and hopefully regaining some of these areas to have more areas without much human presence, because that's the only way we'll have some areas without intense conflict. Otherwise, we'll have very intense conflict all over the elephant range in China.
And I guess just one more quick question from me before we go. Anyone can unmute themselves and ask questions and go back. But we're talking a lot about elephants. What other significant megafauna are up there? Presumably no big cats. Are there leopards left? I don't think tigers anymore.
Yeah, the last tiger was seen in 2007, but the rumor is that in a place not very far from here, close to the border with Laos, there have been tigers recently on the Laos side. So then we are hoping that one day tigers will cross the border and they will come back at some point. Leopards, they have been seen in not too far from here, and there are gaur. So there are a number of gaurs also in Mongyang, the same place as where the elephants are. And there were rhinos until some point. I'm trying to find out when was the last Sumatran rhino in the area. I think it was Sumatran. I get the kind of unclear information, but I think it was Sumatran rhino probably until the 1940s, maybe 1950s in Simao, this place just north of Mongyang. So then, what I would like to see is that in 30, 40 years, we have a much more complex community of large herbivores and large carnivores. As you probably know, tigers and leopards are coming back in northern China. So then we have now around 60 tigers, I believe, Amur tigers in the north, from a very small population that have been growing. And the same with leopards, but also, I don't know if people know this, but Beijing has an interesting population of leopards right now. So leopards are coming back to Beijing the same way that the leopards are coming back to Mumbai. So what I'm beginning to see, and if you can see the same pattern in Europe, has been a dramatic change. You know, in my lifetime, large herbivores and large carnivores in Europe have expanded so much from being extremely threatened in small isolated populations. They have expanded over much of Northern Europe and good parts of Southern Europe. And the same is happening with some carnivores in North America. So then now there are jaguars in the US, and the wolves and the coyotes and brown bears are expanding in many areas. So I think as conservation policies start to become kind of very well established in many countries, as we have what we call the modernization process, in which people are moving into cities, in which people depend much less on agriculture, and they have less chance for direct conflict with wildlife. And also the pro-conservation values increase. What we'll have is that many of these animals will come back. So then I think we need to be prepared for a tipping point in which, if we manage to prevent the local extinction of these species, and we promote these pro-conservation values and the other socioeconomic changes take place, I think in 20, 30 years, we'll have many more megafauna than we had 20 years ago. But these will come with serious problems. So then we'll be very happy to see more tigers, we'll be very happy to see more elephants, but that will mean that you know, there will be serious problems. When you have tigers in a landscape, tigers do kill people, and we cannot be naive about that. You know, tigers kill people, and elephants kill many people. In Asia, Asian elephants kill, I think, around 1,000 people per year. So then when we bring elephants to a place that they haven't been there, people will often not be very happy about that, those who live next to the elephants. So we need to make sure that we are not creating suddenly a big problem for people who didn't have a problem before. You know, I think we need to bring also solutions in terms of human-wildlife coexistence. And I can tell you, when elephants came to the garden, we are a conservation research center. So we have many groups studying biodiversity conservation. When elephants came to the garden, to the neighboring areas, many of my colleagues were not happy at all, because elephants were breaking the experiments, were disrupting their sampling procedures. Suddenly they had to change their routines. And I was telling them, hey guys, you are not happy. Imagine a farmer that suddenly has an elephant in the landscape. We are asking them a lot when we ask them to be tolerant and to live with them.
Thank you. Incidentally, years ago, when I was still free enough to travel, and long before COVID, so it was possible, I was up when I could do adventure-y stuff. I was up probably not even halfway, a third of the way up in the Lao forest before the road was built, between here and the Chinese border. And I met an old Hmong hunter who described to me a Sumatran rhino. And I didn't know what it was. He was described to me as a large, hairy creature that did this, did that, wallowed, and all these other things. And he said he hadn't seen one for a very long time, and they were very, very difficult to catch. But he was old, but I mean, not that old, and this was only 20 years ago. I came back convinced that he had sometime in his lifetime, or his father had passed to him, the idea that there were rhinos to hunt up there in the mountains. The one thing,
when you look at the last dates of confirmed Sumatran rhino presence in the region, it's tragic, because in so many places, rhinos were present in the 1960s, 1970s, maybe 1980s. So then there was a sudden decline at the end of the 20th century, and they disappeared from many places and many countries altogether. But 50 years ago, 70 years ago, they were pretty common. Even in India, there were Sumatran rhinos in the 1960s.
Okay. Sumatran in India. I'll go and look at that. That's not what we're talking about. I'll have to look that one up. The other thing to say, if you ever happen a chance to talk to some Chinese policymakers, for this to happen, they need to sort of get a handle on our lovely neighbor over here, the King's Romans Casino, because China has some fantastic wildlife protection. Laos has something on the books, but not much enforcement. And we have our lovely little enclave here that nobody really has much control over, but I believe the Chinese government could do something about had they chose. The Lao government cannot. And that is not going to help, not helping wildlife at all, and is driving actually the illegal wildlife trade. Anyway, on to Ying Chen. Ying, do you want to unmute yourself and ask this question, or shall I read it for you? Okay, nothing from Ying. Okay, so Ying has concerns about the possibility of increasing human-elephant conflict for this particular group of elephants that are wandering. Though it seems reasonable to say currently optimistic for their long-time survival, because they're feeding mainly on crops, exactly. But if it continues, if the newborn calves and juveniles are learning from early lives to eat crops, and crops are the main source of food, then it's likely they will continue to eat crops and will not want to, even if it becomes available. I'm just going to paraphrase here. Even if it becomes available to go back to the forest, they're not going to want to do that. I think that's a very fair point. Oh, he's in the lab, so he can't ask the question, but that's his question or his point.
Yeah, I agree. Hi, Ian, how are you? Yeah, so then I think these elephants are extremely comfortable eating crops. So then they left Mongyang and they found a lot of food available in the form of corn and paddy and pineapples. And crops are just so much better than other, than wild food for elephants in terms of the taste, in terms of the calories, in terms of the nutrition. And I think it will be important to highlight how it is the human-elephant conflict mitigation in China compared with other countries. So in many other countries, what the mitigation is based on either repelling elephants, moving elephants away from when elephants come into the crop areas or into the human areas, and often doing things like translocation or driving elephants away. The current management in China is based on moving people away. So then when elephants come into a place, what they do is just monitor the movement and then inform the people so people can stay away from the elephants. So in many ways, elephants go around unchallenged. I showed you some videos of elephants going into the village and getting into houses. That is becoming common. And honestly, we have been advocating for a long time about not being too confrontational with elephants. We know that if our mitigation is based on confrontation, on telling them not to come and chasing them away, they become more aggressive and the conflict escalates over the time. So then if you keep on chasing and scaring elephants, after 20 years, we'll have very angry, very aggressive elephants. But what I'm seeing here in China is the opposite, is that elephants that are not facing any challenge, so then they are not scared at all. So I guess that we need to find a middle point that is very unclear. And I don't know if Josh, who I think is in the audience, could add something on this, but I'm not sure what will be the right balance. So we are now kind of exploring new territories. We know that confrontation hasn't worked. Is letting elephants go wherever they want the best solution? But if we do that, elephants lose fear and they become so comfortable eating crops. So in an ideal situation, we would like to kind of have some kind of physical barrier that is not confrontational, that separates kind of go areas and no-go areas. So I'm telling elephants where they can go and where they cannot go, and trying to keep them away from crops, but without involving fear and confrontation. But that will depend, that will require building a lot of fences and things like that. So then it's beginning to happen now in China, in places where the landscape is not expected to change much. So when you have a clear, hard boundary between your crops and your non-crops, you can build a fence there that is robust. But if the landscape is going to be changing, then it's more difficult. But I agree that these elephants have become habituated to eat crops. And now it's going to be difficult for them to give them up because it's just so much better than non-crops.
Thank you. Josh, what's the right balance?
I have no idea. But obviously,
if you don't know, no one knows, Josh.
Yeah, well, I very much appreciate what you're saying, Ahimsa. And it's interesting because 2 points. One is that I think it's really fascinating that this group of elephants that moved towards Kunming, that there was, at least from what I heard, and I know there wasn't a lot coming out, but there was so little negative interactions from local people because people were just fascinated by this move. And that's why what you're saying makes sense to me, that you didn't see this level of aggression. I agree with you 100% that the immediate solution is to put up these physical barriers that are not aggressive or confrontational. I think, unfortunately, what I would fear is that what will happen in China is what's happened everywhere else, in that you'll put up these fences. The elephants that are still wanting and desiring that high quality food will figure out how to get around those barriers. The farmers will get frustrated with the fact that the elephants are doing this, and then you'll see an increase or just a start of that aggression, because I assume it's never happened or it's very rare in China anyway. And then you'll get aggressive elephants. So I mean, I think where China's in a very unique position is that, and I've been kind of saying, you and I talked about this before, and I think studying the individual elephants is so crucially important. And in China, you have this really unique opportunity, since A, there's only 300 of them, and B, because they're not aggressive yet, to try to figure out why these elephants don't have the resources that they need. And as you said, maybe it has nothing to do with the resources that they need. It just has to do with the fact that the crops are just always going to be more attractive. But either way, you want to find a way to provide those elephants with what they need so that they don't want to go into those crop fields at all in the first place. Because those physical barriers, while they will be temporarily effective in the long term, I just fear that, unless the Chinese government is willing to continuously compensate, as Megan's asking, the farmers every time the elephants raid, the farmers are just going to get frustrated, and that's going to just increase the conflict. So it really is about providing those elephants with what they need, so that they don't have a desire to raid those crops in the first place. But that's a pie in the sky kind of a thing that we've always thought about, but how do you get there? I don't know.
Yeah, so I think there are a few peculiarities about the Chinese elephant population, which is different to what I have seen in other countries. One is that people know that elephants are protected, and people are not going to retaliate. I think it's highly unlikely that people will go and kill an elephant. So then I don't know of any elephant poach in the last 10 years or a bit more of 10 years. Okay, when in other countries always happened. In Sri Lanka, I think it's the last figure is about 400 elephants being killed in 2020 or something like that. In India, we're talking also about hundreds of elephants. In China, has been a long time since the last elephant was killed, even though it was common in the 90s and very early 2000s. So then people are not going to take the response by themselves. They're going to outsource the responsibility to the government. Say, hey, your elephants are eating my crops. Do something about that. And the government is fully determined to protect these elephants. It's a matter of, it is decided. Elephants in China cannot go extinct. They're not allowed to go extinct. So now the point is how we can combine those things, how we can combine this political will and then the physical reality of having a landscape that is full of people, and as elephants expand, they will be interacting. I think permanent fences, not electric fences, but solid fences, well designed, can work very well at local scale. And I think the key point here is that what is going to drive people's tolerance is not the economic losses. It is people's safety. Because the crops are being compensated right now. And even though they are not fully compensated, and people, they might be more or less satisfied, but I think that is, human-elephant conflict is not an economic problem in China right now. The point is that people are scared of elephants. Elephants kill many people in China every year. There's a number, I think in 2020 were 14 people killed by elephants, which if you make the numbers per elephant is quite high. In Malaysia, in Peninsular Malaysia, where we had 5 times more elephants than in China, the average is less than 1 person killed per year by elephants. So here we are having kind of a high rate of elephant or human casualty. And this is my perception. I don't have data on this, but my perception is that what really drives tolerance here is the perception of risk of people. When elephants came to Monglun, to this area, there was panic. People were so scared. There were so many, the meetings I was telling before about the communities, there were people panicking, what do we do with elephants? And the fear is real. We're talking about thousands of people scared of 15 elephants. So I think the way to preserve people's support for conservation, the way to preserve the tolerance is going to be reducing the risk of people being in trouble. And I think that's where science can be helpful. If you can understand what kind of situations drive the risk, why were the people who died, what happened? The people who suffer physical damage from elephants, what was the context? What was the driver of that situation? And in some cases, we can modify the landscapes, maybe by installing permanent fences that protect villages and settlements so elephants cannot get inside of the village. In some cases, might be through kind of behavioral education, telling people, what not to do when elephants are around. And of course, improving the monitoring and early warning systems, telling people where elephants are. And there is something unique about China that I think hasn't been discussed enough, is that because there is no risk of poaching, I would say it's negligible, the risk of poaching, you can openly say where elephants are. In Malaysia, we never told where elephants are. We always delay or even modify the location. So we didn't want to give poachers the kind of real-time information about where elephants are because there was the risk of them being killed. But in China, since that risk is not relevant, you can be very open about where elephants are. And I can foresee in 15 years, 25 years, a situation in which we know we have every single elephant tag and we know where they are. And when elephants are going to this village, we just trigger the alarm and say, guys, the elephant is coming. Everyone gets on the phone, a signal and say, hey, the elephant is coming this way. If you're in that way, just move out. So I can see a future where technology can help in a way that I didn't believe in 10 years ago.
Great, thanks, Ahimsa. With fewer elephants, but I guess you can work. There are ways. If anyone can do it, and we had Becky Xu Chen maybe a year ago talking about this and the use of technology, the amazing use of technology going on in China that isn't being trialed or for various reasons hasn't been done elsewhere. So. Yep, that makes sense to me. The only thing I would say about physical fences is, again, I keep showing my age, but it wasn't that long ago. I was up in Hoi Sat Yai in Palau, where I think it was somebody had actually put a physical fence around the village and said, "This is great. Look, we're fencing the elephants out, and we're keeping the." But the problem is once the elephants somehow get inside the fence, they're kind of stuck there. And the other viral elephant that has gone around the world is the one that, although there's no rubble in that kitchen, so I'm slightly suspicious of, but that was Palau, where an elephant stuck its head through someone's kitchen window the other day. So physical fences, but as you say, have to be well designed, and you have to have a contingency for when the elephants get inside so they don't get stuck in your village.
So something that I can mention is that now in the botanical garden where I work, we're going to develop a plan that I think can be used to test a number of things, and hopefully can be integrated into a broader scale plan for the landscape in how to use fences. So for example, we want the elephants to use part of our garden. We have a secondary forest that, we evaluated the cost of having elephants. Some research groups were not very pleased about the idea of elephants coming to the plots, but we agree that, it was acceptable. But also we agree where it's not acceptable to have elephants. So we have offices, we have dormitories, we have a very, very valuable plant collection where elephants cannot come in, and we have, of course, many tourists. So identifying where elephants are welcome and not welcome, and trying to design well-designed physical mechanisms to tell that information to elephants. I think that could be a good way to go.
Perfect. Yes, I can imagine if the elephants ate your dancing tree or your dancing plant there in Xishuangbanna, then there would be trouble. And speaking as a neighbor of yours, can we build a watchtower, please? Anantara Xishuangbanna. Don't have to answer that now. But okay, so questions coming in. If anybody from the Zoom would like to ask a question, please do unmute yourself. But U is popping some of the Facebook questions on Zoom for us as well. Rebecca is asking, are there any go-betweens, biologists and scientists, who can assist the local population to live more easily with the influx of elephants? I guess, how is the interface handled? Is it just through the authorities, or are there biologists, and do you get to go out in the field and talk to communities or your local colleagues?
No, not much. I think this is mainly done by the forestry department. So then elephants are monitored are monitored in a way that is not happening in any other population. So we have 300 elephants in China and several hundred people monitoring them 24/7. So those group of elephants that are outside of reserves, they have a team with a drone almost 24/7 checking where they are. So and these are the people who do most of the interface with the local communities. There are also some NGOs and some foundations who deal with more of the community work. So I think, and I don't know if anyone in the audience can give any insight of how it's working. I'm relatively new, and as a foreigner, I'm not very well integrated with the community work so far, so I cannot comment much more.
Okay, that brings me up before we go on to Farina's questions, another expert. So many elephant experts in the room. I'm so excited. But anyway, the other question is drones. That's come up a lot actually, with the big famous wandering herd, but elsewhere. Do you feel? Yes, there's drones monitoring them 24/7, but there are, and I mentioned in the Asian Elephant Specialist Group that some people, particularly Mara Elephant Project in Africa, are using drones to drive elephants. Now, I think that would. Do you feel that having the? No, you don't. There's carry on. You answer. No, you know the question.
No. You know, I'm fascinated with what I'm seeing with drones. So some of you might know in 2013, I began a project with conservation drones to try to use drones to monitor elephants and elephant habitat in Malaysia. It didn't work. At that time, the drones were not, the technology was not ready for us, and we're producing data we didn't know how to use, and the canopy was so high. So I kind of became skeptical of drones for many years. But what we have now is drones that are fantastic just to monitor the presence. So then we have great cameras with fantastic zooms, and also with infrared cameras, so we can see at night where elephants are doing. So I think in terms of monitoring, the elephants are fantastic, and the drones are very, very high up. They can be 100 meters. So elephants don't seem to be bothered at all by the presence of the drones. Going into things like chasing elephants, I can imagine that what you can do is like very infrequently, in extreme situations, do something that uses fear to change their behavior. Like elephants are going to places you don't want them to go, so you send some drones that make noise with speakers, but you cannot do that too often because elephants will become habituated. So it has to be something like a very, very last resort that you use for some points. And in a landscape like this, I cannot imagine how you can use drones to drive elephants because they will go wherever they want. Right? It's such a complex landscape. So maybe in a very open environment with multiple drones, but I think they will get habituated. There is no way that the drone is going to intimidate the elephant.
Yeah. And in the Mara, they have, if the elephants go, and even with all the space he has in the Mara to play with, I've seen a couple of videos where he actually accidentally drives the elephants back to himself. So it's in a crowded landscape with lots of humans and crops, it isn't going to work. And yes, we tried monitoring years ago in Kuiburi. I think I was part of the project.
I think the drones have been really key in what has happened with the Kunming elephants, because what happened is that people in China, they were not very familiar with elephants, okay, with Chinese elephants. I think people were more familiar with Africans in Kenya or Tanzania than with elephants in China. And if I'm correct, I think sometime in the 1960s, something like that, the national government in Beijing sent people to Xishuangbanna to see if there were still elephants in China. So then basically elephants were pretty unknown in China for some time. But suddenly people were watching elephants with the drones, and the quality of the image is so good. They didn't see only elephants as an animal. They were seeing the behavior. They were seeing the personality. They saw the elephant sleeping. That was a super cute photo, right? That photo became very popular. They saw the mother helping the calf to cross the canal, coming out of the canal. They saw the elephants open the tap, or they saw the teenagers kicking each other and then fighting. So then I think this quality of image was a game changer because people could relate to elephants. Suddenly they were not just a thing far away. There's something that they can really see in a much more complex way. And then the drones allow you to be relatively far from the elephant, hundreds of meters away from the elephants, but having this very close insight of what they're doing. So I think they're going to be really a game changer in terms of studying and monitoring elephants. I think we'll see a lot of work being done with drones in the next few years.
And people like Wild Aid and their local counterparts need to get on this wave fast and ride it. If people are, what they've been trying to do for years is get people to feel more for elephants. So yeah, that's a whole other study. Before I talk too much, Farina, who I'm sure you know, is asking, you started projects in different countries with different cultures and political situations. Can you share what is the biggest challenge every time you go to a new area and how you deal with it, aside from learning the language, I guess?
I haven't done very well with learning the languages in the last few years. Okay, so yeah, it's every country has been very different. I have experienced mainly in 3 countries, in Sri Lanka, in Malaysia, and in China. And I always say that for me, Sri Lanka was a big failure. But I think we humans, like elephants, we need to learn. Okay, so we cannot deal with complex situations and succeed at the first attempt. So then as a young researcher, I wanted to be useful, but I was not useful because I knew how to do some statistics and collect some data and pose some research questions, but I didn't understand how to move from this kind of getting data and answering questions into helping conservation and helping management. And probably no one was interested in hearing what I had to say. So for me, it was very frustrating feeling that I couldn't contribute to conservation, but no one cared about what I was doing. But looking back in retrospect, that was really good for me. First, because I learned that if you want to work in conservation, you need to do much more than research. You need to be able to work with the government or with practitioners, with those who will really do the conservation. And second, that you need time to learn. If I was making recommendations at that time, probably would be very off because I didn't understand the complexities involved. And we need time. So then 15 years later, I feel in a much better position to judge, the complexity of the system we're dealing with. In Malaysia, it was a great experience working with the government. So we had this project, or we have this project that still is going on. That is a collaboration between the research at university and the government. But what I always found is that we were the drivers of the interactions. So then the researchers, had to be always telling the practitioners, hey, listen to what my results say, because this matters to you. Listen to how we can be useful for you to make your plan or to make your decisions. And we're always kind of telling them, how can we help you? So it was very much, we were driving the process. But it worked very well. And I think it was slow, and we speak different languages and we have different paces. But for me, it was a very fruitful collaboration. But we didn't change a lot. We changed something, and I think we can tell that in 10 years, we saw some fruits of the work we have been doing. And what I'm seeing in China is very, very different. So China is much more technical. I work in the research arm of the government. I work for the Chinese Academy of Sciences. So I don't need to chase anyone to tell about my research. It's the other way around. I found myself much more often than I thought in meeting rooms with policymakers and asking me, what should we do? And I say, well, can you give me 2 days to think about this? So the science is much more integrated in the policy and the planning. So in that sense, it's been an interesting experience. It's very science-based, and there's a lot of to build policies. There's a lot of feedback coming from basic layers, then goes up into high-level policymakers. So the political will and the economic resources in China are different to what I saw in other places. And again, we're dealing with a small elephant population that for the Chinese economy is a small thing. I can imagine in Sri Lanka, elephants are much more, affect many more people in proportion and affect a much bigger segment of people's livelihoods and economy. So then it's very different. But what I will say is that as a professional, it has been a great experience changing environments, because you learn that there is no single normal way of doing things. So there's no single normal way of how things are. So when you experience different landscapes, different cultures, different political cultures, different economic situations, I think it adds value in how you can think about bringing solutions to conservation. So then I will encourage young people, know somewhere very well and think about where you want to be useful in the long term, but spend significant amount of time in other places and try to learn all the systems. Will be very, very helpful.
Thank you for that. And I can hear almost hear all the experts packing their bags and wanting to come and join you in Xishuangbanna for a little while to come and see the almost the reverse of some of the things that they encounter on a day-to-day basis. Next question is from Hannah Mumby. I think you've already actually answered it, but we'll go ahead anyway because it's Hannah and she will have some input also. Because the nexus of the conflict is in this specific situation is risk to humans, maybe the mitigation strategies have to be directed to that. So the fences could be part of it, but would text messages or text messages to communities or something even lower tech work? I think you've already covered that, but as you know, Hannah has some great experiences, so best to cover everything.
So very, very quickly, you know that in China, you cannot survive without WeChat. It's an app that we use for many, many things. And then in some places, there are now some WeChat applications. So within WeChat, small mini programs that are called, that convey information about where elephants are to people who are in that area. So I think we'll see in the next few years, we'll see a lot of development on this kind of AI, smart early warning systems in which we can detect what are the population that require the message, and those things will be conveyed to them. But also I must tell that we're dealing with people. People are complex animals with complex decision making. So for example, when the elephants were in the garden, we had an area that we didn't allow people to come in because of the risk of meeting the elephants. Well, we had people coming in to pick up some mangoes, for example. And there was one situation in which we saw with camera traps that there were two people coming into that area with the motorbikes, and they passed through 5 signals of don't come in, you cannot come, the elephants here. So people just chose to pass those areas. And then with the drone, we found the motorbikes on the ground. And there was a time in which we didn't know if these guys had been, if they were alive, or we didn't know what happened. We just saw the motorbikes were trampled, and then after a while, people came up and they had an encounter with the elephants, but they were safe. But you can tell people about the risk, but still there will be an element that is completely out of your control.
In a way, reassuring to hear that happens in China as well, because you get the impression that everybody just follows the whole, because that is certainly something I did it yesterday as well, even though I knew that there was an elephant up there. I went somewhere I shouldn't do. So yes, but I wasn't stealing mangoes. I was on a mission. Yeah, but reassuring really to hear. Another question from Hannah is how important are buffer zones? Are there buffer zones, I guess, in the Chinese system, or can these not really be big enough to be relevant in this scenario?
It's a bit different. So I think the protected areas have different kind of zonation. So there are some core areas, and these are the areas that there are no people around, and this is where the forest has been growing a lot. And then there are non-core areas within the protected area that will be a bit similar to the concept of the buffer zone, which is where you have villages, you have a human activity, but is within the protected area, not outside.
Okay, so yeah, a slightly different system. I guess I don't think there are any more questions. I think if you have any questions, please. Josh is agreeing with you on a few things as well. If there are any more questions on Facebook, please type them in, or if anybody on the Zoom would like to unmute themselves and ask. My question to Phil, I guess, is about the Elephant Valley and that massive tourist attraction, attracting tens of thousands of people per day. I think the elephant show has moved. There isn't a show there anymore. But to that piece of habitat and that lovely walkway, how often given the human traffic there, the sheer number, and there's a lovely center right at the end of the walkway, which was empty, unfortunately. How often do wild elephants show up there? Do you know?
I don't know. We saw elephants. I don't know if Becky's in the audience, but Becky and I, when we went, the first time I went to Elephant Valley, we saw elephants. We saw wild elephants, and I don't know how often they come. So I think for the place is basically to talk about elephants and to show the place. So then people don't expect to see elephants, and probably it's very, very rare that they actually see the elephants. You can see photos from people who go to Elephant Valley. There's a place where elephants come to drink water because there must be some kind of mineral leak. And there seem to be elephants quite regularly there, but I don't know how often. So just for context, this is within the protected area. It's a small area that has been set up for tourism. And I guess, yeah, that the idea is to give people an experience about elephant things, from elephant biology to elephant habitat to human-elephant interactions.
Yep, and when you can travel again, when people can travel again, I absolutely suggest people don't, not just because there's an Anantara there, I absolutely suggest everyone go up to Xishuangbanna and have a look. Also, among the many things there, and you can get to tea plantations very high up very quickly, 1,000-year-old tea trees. This is, I'll be invited back. And what's the tall trees skyway? There's so much to see, and the most underrated cuisine ever. Fantastic food. So do go and visit Ahimsa when you can, and stay in the Anantara, of course. So I think
in the botanical garden where we work is a beautiful place. It's such a worth place to spend a few days walking around.
Yep, agreed and seconded. So definitely do go and see when you can. I think that is all we have, unless anybody would like to unmute themselves and ask a final question. Thank you very, very much, Ahimsa. Anyone want to unmute themselves? You said staring at the screen. No, okay. Thank you very, very much, Ahimsa. That's been a fantastic insight into what's going on up there, and into the elephants of China, and the current situation and what the future might hold. So without further ado, everybody is saying thank you. There's a lot of thanks coming through on the Facebook, I'm told, as well. So brilliant talk. One for the ages. We'll certainly, as always, leave the recording on Facebook, and I'll send you a recording, and we'll put it on YouTube as well, very, very quickly. And hopefully we can learn. Well, the world waits with bated breath to see what these elephants, your wandering elephants, do next. And yes, hopefully
let's talk again in a few months to see what happens.
Exactly.
Thank you, John. I think everyone has been a big pleasure.
Thank you, and I hope that your elephants come back to the gardens sometime next year as well, and we can develop a season.
Well, I can tell you that right now I'm extremely busy. Many of us are extremely busy developing an elephant plan for the gardens. Then we intend to be the first botanical garden that has elephants among their offer of things. So I can, my research group belongs to something called the Center for Integrative Conservation. And about 1 year ago, we were thinking that as part of our mission, we should be doing some in situ conservation in the garden. We thought, okay, we have our research going in multiple countries, but we thought, what can we do to bring conservation in the garden? And one of our ideas was to have some reintroduction. So maybe we can bring some mouse deer, we can bring some primates or some birds. We thought about doing something. Well, we already have the answer. We have elephants right now. And then now we are developing a plan to be able to have elephants within the garden, and hopefully regularly.
Well, you and I should continue to talk about that, because almost since the inception of the Anantara Xishuangbanna, which is 10 years old, something like that now, the company that owns it, then we manage it, have been asking me whether they can have captive elephants up there, and I've been saying nope. But if we can get us wild elephants, I'm sure that. Oh, well, let's talk. Well, this is something to take offline. I can't make any promises.
Yep.
We were already talking. Let's talk even deeper. I know we were talking about the situation room and all sorts of other things as well, even before they came to your gardens. So thank you very much, Ahimsa. Thank you very much, everybody, for watching. I think this has been fascinating. I don't think it's been we've dragged too much of anybody's time. I'm sure everybody has learned a lot. Please do tell your friends and colleagues about it and the recording, and we will learn more later. Until well, I'm back at 4 o'clock this afternoon for a lockdown live stream, which will be nowhere near as fascinating, but I will have elephants to show you, captive ones, unfortunately, but we will do that. And yep, until next time, Ahimsa, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody on Facebook and on Zoom. And yes, lots of thanks coming through as well. Bye, everyone.